I thought, you know what, I'm making a complete career pivot. I'm going to go all in on short-term rental design. I sold my agency and I immediately jumped into designing short-term rentals. So I design virtually.
Welcome to the On the Wall podcast, where we engage in conversations with artists, designers, enthusiasts, and visionaries who shape the world of interiors. Today's guest is Andrea Moxham of Moxie Co. Moxie Co prides itself on turning short-term rentals into unforgettable experiences with thoughtful design. If you enjoy these conversations, please subscribe, leave a rating, leave a review, and share this podcast with a friend. Thank you for joining me for another episode of On the Wall. Today we're going to be talking with an interior designer whose focus is on virtual consultations, and she does a lot of stuff for short-term rentals and Airbnbs. She's just waiting in the lobby now, so let's bring her in. Joining me now is Andrea Moxham from Moxie Co. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Where are you based at?
I am in Ontario, Canada, so a couple hours outside of Toronto. We live on a farm, so quite a few hours outside of Toronto, but that kind of puts us on the map in Ontario.
So you have an interior design business. Tell me a little bit about how you got started. I know I don't want to jump too far ahead of you, because I know you do a lot of virtual consultations and a lot of short-term rental stuff, but kind of bring me back to kind of what got you into interior design in the first place, how you got your start.
Yeah. So my husband and I started investing in real estate here in Ontario, I guess about 5 years ago. He is a contractor. So, we were just looking to make some investments. So we purchased a couple properties. We turned those into short-term rentals. We did a couple of midterm rentals. And in the process of renovating those, I just fell in love with the design aspect. I think a lot of designers, this is kind of their foray is getting into design by working on their own projects. And I just couldn't get enough of it. So I did a little bit of research. At the time, I owned a marketing agency, and I just made this quick decision. I thought, you know what, I'm making a complete career pivot. I'm going to go all in on short-term rental design. I sold my agency, and I immediately jumped into designing short-term rentals. So I design virtually. So even though I live here in Ontario, I've never visited any of the properties that I design. I do it all remotely. So I work with teams. I mostly design in the US. So I work with teams that will go down and install, or my clients will install themselves depending on how handy they are. And I love it. So I've been doing this about 2 or 3 years now, and just can't get enough of it.
Wow. So, okay. So you really were just doing sort of like flipping and house and sort of just as your own, like renting out your own properties, and interior design sort of came after the fact. How did you find out that you like had a knack for it, or was it just purely the passion for it? Or did you get somebody going like, hey, you really know what you're doing?
It started as the passion. And then once I guess there was a little more awareness around it, because like I would decorate in our house, but you only get so many people coming into your own house and giving you compliments. So the first couple of properties that we sold, there were professional photos of those properties. So that's when people, I think, started to be like, wow, did you decorate this? And I was like, okay, so not only do I love this, but I guess it's garnering a little bit of attention from other people too. So I just kind of put the two together, and I took some online courses. So I fully immersed myself in not only the short-term rental design aspect, but residential design as well. So getting a really good understanding of, like color theory and trends and remodeling best practices, things like that. So I, at the same time as launching my business, I was also doing all of this research and taking these courses. So I was kind of learning as I go.
Yeah. So you said just only like 3 years ago, right? So you would have been kind of taking a crash course on all things interior design. What sort of things I guess, have you learned in that short time period that have maybe opened your eyes or, enlightened you in a way?
On the Wall is brought to you by Milton & King, your trusted partner for luxury crafted wall coverings. Milton & King's trade program is designed to make your creative process seamless, offering exclusive trade-only benefits such as complimentary samples, early access to new collections, and professional pricing structured to enhance your business success. To assist with your projects, you'll have the flexibility to create your own custom swatch book, tailored specifically to your design needs. With dedicated customer support every step of the way, our trade program is here to elevate your design vision and simplify your journey from inspiration to installation. Ready to join a partner who understands your craft? Visit miltonandking.com to apply for your trade account today. Milton & King, your vision, our craftsmanship.
I would say the underlying thread is that design is such a subjective thing that you really can't follow design rules. So even now, some of the decisions that I make in short-term rental design projects, my clients will say like, are you sure this is going to work? And I'm like, yes, you just have to trust the process, because there are no rules to say, oh, you can't mix metals, or you can't do pattern on pattern, or there are certain patterns that you can't put together. It's just such a subjective thing that I would say that is the kind of common denominator that I'm learning through real life experiences and also these online courses, is that design is about experimentation. It's about editing and reiterating. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this, is that everything is kind of fixable too, So for example, I had a client who was asking, I'm thinking about painting my trim a dark color, but I'm not sure if this is going to be in style in a couple of years. And I was like, first of all, if you've been thinking and humming about this decision, this is in her own personal residence. This is not a short-term rental. So my advice here was a little bit different. I said, if this is something that's been kind of on your brain for a little while, you need to go for it. You need to experiment. Paint is such an easy thing to change in a couple of years. It's not like, tile, where maybe if you get sick of it, you have to completely rip that out and start over. You can just paint it again. So I said, go for it, because it's all about experimenting. And, if you try it in one room and you really like it, then you can continue. So yeah, I would say what I've learned in this short few years is that design is about experimenting. It's about taking risks, and it's not the end of the world if you don't like something, or, and I don't like to say this, but if something goes out of style, because I think if you read some of the most popular interior design publications, what they mention as being in style and out of style is completely contradictory from one to the next. So I try not to pay attention to those.
So in terms of like when you're educating yourself and diving into this, are you kind of getting into any sort of, I guess, like historical movements of different types of design and that kind of stuff, like kind of going back?
A little bit. I do tend to tune out on that type of thing. And I think it goes back to this idea that maybe there are design principles, but there really are no rules. So I think from my own perspective, I like to learn about that stuff just so I have this foundation of understanding, like, what makes a design style and certain shapes and patterns and colors and textures. Like, how would we categorize those, but not necessarily like, how to design a mid-century modern home, because those, like what a mid-century modern home actually looked like versus what the expectation is now has changed so much. So I dabble in that a little bit purely from my own understanding, or to explain to a client, this is the direction that I think we should take with this space or this property. And it's rooted back to this principle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Actually, that brings up another question. So you mentioned, I mean, I guess you want to communicate with a common language so that when you say mid-century modern, what you're saying as well, somebody else's understanding. But I found it interesting that you said what that was and what people expect it to be now are different. What are those differences? How does that manifest practically?
Oh, geez. I think purely it comes down to the sheer number of design styles. I think if you looked decades ago, there were a handful of design styles. Now we have just like amplified that, and there's so many more design styles that there's bound to be overlap between a lot of them. And again, it comes down to perception. So you can categorize like materials in different design styles, but the shape of that item or the color of it, that now puts it in a different category. So I think just the sheer number of design styles that we've created now really shifts the way people perceive what each of them are. And like just the amount of overlap between them has just become astronomical, that I think there are, maybe a few design styles that are a little bit easier to bucket and to label or categorize. Mid-century modern is one that I have mentioned a couple of times, and I think it's one of those design styles that is a little bit easier to identify. I think, depends on, I guess, your perception.
So how did you go from, it's like you're doing it for your own kind of short-term rentals and you're falling in love with interior design. How is it that you go, okay, not only am I going to start offering my services as an interior designer, but I'm just going virtual? Or, did you start doing more kind of just like residential spaces first and then went virtual? Or was it something where it's just like, no, I'm just diving into the virtual space?
It's funny how that segue kind of happened. When I was running my agency, I was so burnt out by the number of phone calls and meetings that I was having every day. At the end of the day, I would just be like, oh my gosh, like, I don't even know if I got up to get a drink of water in the last 6 hours. And I was so burnt out from that feeling that I knew I wanted to do something different that gave me more flexibility, that I wouldn't be on the phone all day and that I had a little bit more control. So that was my logic going into this. I never once considered doing residential projects where I was going into people's homes. And that was a decision I made really quickly because I realized that the attachment that a homeowner has to their home is very different than the attachment or the lack of attachment that an investor has to a short-term rental. And it's a lot easier for me to build that trust with an investor, where most of the investors that I work with that are purchasing short-term rentals, they don't even see the property in person. They are doing everything remotely. It's purely an investment. And they have this expectation that they're going to be hiring people for specialty skills kind of across the board. They've got a realtor, they've got a mortgage lender, they've got, a property management company, they've got a plumber. They know that they're going to need a designer. So the fact that they're kind of prefaced into working with someone like me was really attractive coming into this industry. In fact, I get sometimes the odd inquiry from someone local who's looking for support from a residential designer. And I'm very quick to say, I'm not the best fit for you. Because not only is someone local expecting someone local to come into their home, but it's just a very different dynamic working on someone's home versus a short-term rental. The other thing that I think led me into short-term rentals was the amount of risk that investors are willing to take on the design side than someone who's designing their home that they're living in all day, every day. They want it to feel comfortable. They want it to feel calm. They want it to feel something that they can live with day in, day out, versus a short-term rental that maybe you're staying in for a weekend, taking lots of pictures. You are looking for something interesting, something really colorful. But then you go back to your house where it's a little more neutral, it's a little more calm, it's not so loud. So I loved the opportunity to be able to kind of flex that creativity muscle and bring in those loud colors and patterns and pieces of furniture.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you have it sort of, I guess, all down to a science now where like an investor will approach you and be like, okay, I need 1, 2, 3, and A, B, and C. And, do you sort of have your process now that is sort of kind of not a one size fits all, but sort of a way that you do things, a process that sort of works across the board?
Yeah, definitely. And a huge part of it is actually market research, because the design is led by, the strategy. I look at the other short-term rentals in the area. What do they have? How are they designing? What are people commenting on in their reviews on those listings? What do they like about the decor? What do they not like about the decor? So that piece is so critical. And that's where the rest of the process kind of falls into place based on those findings. So, if it's a really, really competitive market where there's an Airbnb on every corner, we know that we need to niche down. We need to do something really interesting. Maybe it's a themed house. So once we've kind of arrived at that decision, then the rest of the process really just kind of falls into place after you do it so many times.
Another question that I had was, so are some of these that you're designing for, like if they're in certain locations, are you taking into account like the themes of certain cities or nearby kind of, what's it called? Like travel attractions, things like that sort of. So like I'm in Nashville, for example, and I've seen a couple of short-term rentals that are pop up on social media, and you see people decorating a lot with like cowboy themes and, country music themes and things like that. Does that sort of ever come into the thought process when you're designing the place where you're like, okay, well, this place is, I'm designing something that's a short-term rental in, Anaheim, California or Orlando. So I'm going to make it Disney themed or that kind of stuff. Does any of that come into play?
Absolutely. With every project. And it would kind of be doing a disservice not to incorporate that local culture and those local attractions, because that's what people are coming to the area for to some degree. There are some regions where, like some of these urban cities, there's tons of reasons why people are coming here. But for example, like the Smoky Mountains, people are obviously coming to see those Smoky Mountains and to spend time outside and do some hiking, things like that. So to be completely pivoting and doing a completely different design strategy, I think just doesn't match that expectation that people coming to the area are looking for. So it always plays a huge role in the way that I design a property. I just finished one in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we did very earthy colors, lots of terracotta, even some coral. So I think it's super important to bring in pieces of that local atmosphere, that local environment, because that's what people expect.
What are some of the, I guess, challenges or hurdles that you have to overcome from being a virtual designer as opposed to, going someplace local or something like that? And not necessarily the short-term rental aspect of it, but just from a design perspective, from someone going in and looking at the specs of a space and that kind of stuff. What are some of the challenges that you have faced, and what have you done to kind of pivot and overcome those issues that may prop up, I guess, somewhat regularly?
Yeah. At first, I had a really hard time putting myself in the photos that I receive from my clients to really get a full understanding of the property. I used to have clients take videos of every room from every angle, get floor plans, and I was building out models in my floor planning software, but it just doesn't give you the same effect of actually standing in a property. So what I now require, there's a tool called a Matterport. You sometimes see them on real estate listings, and it's where a photographer will go in with a special Matterport device. They'll scan every room, and it creates this 3D virtual tour that's really incredible. You can take every measurement like, the thickness of the baseboard, for example, or like the distance between cabinet knobs. So that has been a huge hack to be able to design virtually. It's now something that I require for all projects. So that has alleviated a huge piece. It doesn't still give you the same effect of standing in a property. So even though it puts me so much closer to being able to kind of visualize a property and how close things are when you're actually standing in it, it still does create some challenges. So I would say that is one, is like, it's kind of like being in a fishbowl when you're doing this 3D virtual tour. You can still see, up and down and side to side and get all of the angles of the room. But there is something to be said about standing in a room and being able to like see all the way through to the other side and kind of understand that proximity. So I would say that is still a challenge. I think the other is being able to trust reviews on product on retailers' websites, because I'm not actually sitting on the sofa. I have to go off of what I see and read. So I spend a fair bit of time, understanding retailers' manufacturing processes and things like that. But I'm never actually sitting on that sofa. So I will go back to clients sometimes later and be like, okay, that sofa that we put in 6 months ago, how is it holding up? So that's definitely a challenge too, that I envy in residential kind of local designers, because there's no replacing, for the most part. I would say, they're going into the stores and they're sitting on the furniture. They're able to touch and feel it before it even goes into their client's property. And I don't have that luxury. So I would say that's another one of the challenges, is we do have to deal with, not a lot, but returns. They happen in most projects because things will show up damaged, or things will show up just not with the quality that they expected.
Yeah. I mean, I can just speak from personal experience. There's been where I was at an Airbnb in Dallas, and I was like, oh, this looks great. And then I went in and the couch was sort of so, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like rinky dink, like just, I sat it and I was like, I'm not going to sit in this for the rest of the time that I'm here, because it's just not comfortable at all. Like, it looks fine, but then you sit in and you realize kind of like how cheap it is. And you're like, oh, I'm not going to relax here at all. So it's interesting how you're diving into the manufacturing and the retail aspect of it, so that you know that you're getting quality. But I found it interesting how you said you follow up like 6 months later and ask how certain things are holding up. Is that typical of sort of your engagement with some of the investors that are hiring you? Is that it extends and goes down the line and you're checking in with them and all that kind of stuff?
I mean, it's not something written that, we have like check-ins at certain milestones. I just personally like to check in on my clients and see how the property is doing. We build a relationship in the short time that we're working together. So I like to hear how their business is doing. So I just personally like to reach out and check in. Sometimes they'll have updates or new photos to share, or sometimes it is bad news where we had to replace that bed. Or sometimes they'll reach out to me, and I'm completely fine with this, if 6 months later that sofa that we selected broke. I'm happy to help them choose another one, because I do feel a level of responsibility that what we chose originally was not the quality that we expected. So I'll help them choose something new if we need to.
I guess the other interesting aspect of this is, now that I'm thinking about it. So if someone is, I guess, hiring a traditional interior designer to do their home, they might not ever see them again after their home is done. Because, I mean, unless they do like, oh, I'm going to do this room and then I'm going to come back to the same interior designer and just move on to this room, or something like that. But it seems to me that you would have a lot of return clients, because you're dealing with investors that are at a certain level and they got this property and that property, and then they open this new one and they know that you did a good job last time, so they're coming back to you again. which necessarily wouldn't be the case with someone who's just kind of owns their home. Because once they do it, it might be that way for 20 plus years or for, the rest of the time that they live there. So do you find that you're getting a lot of sort of repeat clients?
Yep, I do. Yeah. Especially towards the end of the year when I find investors are purchasing more properties, I guess, as a tax incentive. So they'll kind of just like stack their portfolio towards the end of the year. And they're like, I need you to design this one, this, and this one before the end of the year. So I find, a lot of my clients come back once they're ready to purchase their next property. The other thing that makes short-term rental design a little bit different than residential design is when you're finished designing your own home, you're not bringing in a photographer to get professional photos. You're just going to continue living in it. Unless maybe it's like magazine quality. But the expectation with a short-term rental is that you're hiring a photographer to come in and get those listing photos. So it's kind of a built-in way to help boost my portfolio because they have this expectation that they're going to be bringing in a photographer, which is nice.
Right. Well, that sort of brings me to my next question. And it's interesting that you said in the beginning that you were in marketing before, which makes a lot of sense. Like I noticed on your website, you've got, which is, your website is Moxie & Co. Is it .com?
.ca.
.ca. Okay, moxieandco.ca. One of the things that I noticed is that you have a freebie section, and you give basically, here's how you can make sure you get the right size rug. You have like a rug size thing. But one of the things that you have in there is on photography and presentation. And so talk to me a little bit about that aspect of the short-term rental process, going into it with the mind of, this is going to be photographed, this is going to be presented online. And then tell me a little bit also about the how you have that feature on your freebie section and maybe some of the other features that you have on there.
Introducing Benchmade Modern. Tailored sofas crafted just for you, delivered in as little as 4 weeks. Create a custom piece that perfectly reflects your style. Choose from our collection of designs from timeless to modern. Customize the size, then personalize with your ideal fabric, cushion, and leg style. Discover your dream sofa today.
Yeah. So all of the freebies on my website came from a direct client need. So for example, that photography, I think I call it a photo prep checklist. So why I created that was I was noticing, especially with the clients that install their properties themselves. So I'll choose all the furniture and decor. Everything's lovely, beautiful, high quality. And it's, there's only one way to set up like a dining table, something like that. But there are so many pieces of that design plan that need to be styled. So for example, like a pillow, we like to fluff it and we like to chop it. A blanket at the end of the bed, if we're layering those blankets, I like to fold it into thirds and lay it across the bed. And then the second one goes on top of that. So there are a lot of little things that I don't have the benefit of doing as kind of that final touch when the property is getting installed. And then a photographer would come in and, the pillows are just kind of like crammed into the corner of the sofa. The drapes are maybe wrinkled, little things like that I was like, if we can fix these before a photographer comes in, the success of that property is so much higher. So I put together this document just, with a checklist of make sure room by room, do this, so that when the photographer comes in, because photographers don't know to do those things either. You essentially need like a stylist on site. But investors don't want to pay for that. They've already hired a designer. They've already hired potentially an installer. You don't need someone in between to be fluffing and chopping the pillows. So yeah, I put together that freebie. I give it to all of my clients, but I just thought, why don't I put that on my website? as something that someone is kind of navigating their own design, their own install would find helpful. So they can download that on the website. And that's kind of the way that all of the freebies on my website came to exist. So I think another one I have on there is a stocking list. So someone's setting up a short-term rental, they know that they're going to need cutlery and paper towel and Q-tips and bath towels and things like that. So I just started working on this huge list of things that I know a short-term rental needs to succeed, to make sure that they're equipping the guest with everything that they might need for their stay. So yeah, I've got a big, huge list. It goes room by room, with mostly Amazon links, sometimes Walmart, just, quick ship retailers that you can use to set up your short-term rental for the first time and make sure you've got everything. So yeah, all of those were created out of real needs. And I just thought, why not make these available on my website to those that stumble upon it?
Yeah. I noticed one of the other things, going back to the design a little bit, when it comes to like things like wallpaper, I noticed that like a lot of times in the rental units, they're just, as opposed to like kind of like wrapping the whole room and kind of making some big design statement, usually it's like accent walls, as opposed to, a big wrapped room, or what are some of the other like for example, like even sofas, or I guess even appliances like televisions and stuff. Are there any other sort of design considerations that you have when you're working with short-term rentals, as opposed to like a residential, like a home-owned residential space?
Definitely. One is budget. So when you first mentioned, maybe we're doing like wallpaper on the ceiling, or maybe we're doing like 2 panels in behind a bed in wallpaper. A lot of the time that comes down to budget. It's expensive to wrap every bedroom in wallpaper. And it's harder to justify that cost as an investor versus someone who's going to be living in that house and seeing it all day, every day, and like remembering how much they love that wallpaper. So a lot of it comes down to a budget perspective. But yeah, there are a lot of considerations that go into designing a short-term rental versus a residential. One is occupancy. So we are trying to not necessarily cram as many guests, but comfortably fit as many guests into a property as possible. So sometimes that means, having hybrid furniture. So for example, that Scottsdale property, what we did was a couple of ottomans with trays on top in the living room that can double as seating, but they can also be a place to set down your drink. So someone in a residential property, like they probably want a good high quality wood coffee table, but something like a short-term rental where we're really trying to maximize space, we need to use those dual purpose pieces of furniture. There's a lot of little considerations like that I think just kind of come as second nature to me, but it really sets a short-term rental designer apart from a residential designer. I will hear from investors that they work with a residential designer and they just have a very different mindset. They would say, well, why wouldn't you wrap the entire room in wallpaper? Well, because wrapping the entire room in wallpaper, isn't going to allow us to charge an extra $200 a night, but we can still create that same effect of like that really big, bold wow factor by doing the ceiling in wallpaper, and save, potentially a couple $1,000s. So yeah, tons of considerations. Every room has, I think, its own nuances that make short-term rental design different than residential design.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just a couple more questions for you. Can you sort of just explain what the process looks like, kind of maybe just in a very brief bullet point form, kind of from beginning to end? Like what are sort of the steps when someone engages you and they go, I just got a short-term rental, and they email you, like what's sort of first, second, third in the process?
So I'll have a chat with them because I want to get an understanding of what their vision is for the property. And it also gives me an opportunity to ask them about any remodeling plans. So for example, they'll typically send me the real estate listing of the house that they've purchased. But but let's say the listing shows that it's a 4-bedroom, but they have plans to turn it into a 6-bedroom. We need to chat about that. Where are those bedrooms going? So we'll have a chat so that I can better understand the project. Once we're aligned on the proposal, obviously, and the service agreement, is when I move into the research and strategy phase. So like I was talking about earlier, I'm looking at competitors in the area. I'm looking at why people are traveling here, what their expectation is in terms of a rental, who they're traveling with, what maybe those unique needs are that group. For example, is it families with young babies? Are we going to need, things for infants to do? Are we going to need a separate space for them to sleep that's quiet and like completely blackout dark? So taking all of those considerations into the strategy, and then I'll go through that strategy with my client. We'll look at a mood board that I've put together to make sure that we're on the same page design-wise. So I'll show them real examples of furniture and patterns and wallpapers and color palettes and things like that. And then once we are on the same page is when I do all of the sourcing and selecting for the entire property. So I'm choosing the paint colors. If we are remodeling a bathroom, I'm choosing the tile and the vanity and the light fixtures. I'm choosing all of the bedding and the drapery, the art, and then that gets delivered to my client in a big shopping list with a corresponding kind of 2D design board. So I like to mock up the entire property in a way that they can visualize everything and how it'll look together. So not necessarily a rendering. I find that investors don't need 3D renderings when it's, kind of a short timeline. So they are now able to go and purchase everything from the retailer's website. I source everything from retailers that have in-stock inventory and ships quickly, because investors, they don't have time to waste, which is another way that residential design is different than short-term rental design. In your residential home, you fall in love with a piece of furniture, you're willing to wait 12 weeks for it to arrive. A short-term rental investor is not. They're paying the mortgage on a property that's just kind of sitting there and not earning any revenue. They need something that's in stock and arrives really quickly. So yeah, that's kind of my process. My client will receive everything itemized and detailed out, where to buy it, how much it costs. And then they go and purchase it. And then if I am coordinating the install, then my install team goes out once everything has arrived and they set it up, and then the property is ready to go.
Okay. So I maybe I misunderstood. So when it's sort of ready to install, are you the person sort of with the relationships with like the contractors and things like that to do that work, or is that left to the investor to have their own people, or do you have your own people that you kind of work with regularly?
It's kind of a three-way conversation. So the investor or the owner is the one that finds the contractor and scopes out all of the work. But once it comes time for the contractor to do the work is where I get looped in. And okay. I'm making all the selections for tile. And, if they have questions like, okay, what color grout am I putting on this tile? I'm that person that they go to. Some of my clients prefer to be completely removed, and they're like, you do this.
You handle it.
Yeah, exactly. But some want to be involved. So I think it depends on the project. But for the most part, I'm kind of the one steering the ship.
Okay, cool. Do you ever read the reviews?
All the time. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good source for my own website. If someone comments on the decor, I'm like, there we go. There's a +1. Yeah. So you mean the reviews on my clients' properties or competitors?
Yeah. Like the reviews on the property to see what are people that are staying there. Like, do you even have positive things to say or negative things to say? It's, you ever sort of look at that stuff and go like, oh, what do they think of this? Like, have you ever made a bold decision that maybe you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work, or I hope it's going to work, or do you sort of, I don't know, not to say play it safe. I've made a lot of
bold decisions, but they've always turned out favorably. I've never received a comment from a client or from a guest that stays at the client's property that it was too much. it's also something that they can very visibly see before booking, right? So like if
Right.
I've designed a property that's really colorful, really loud, they know that before they book. It's not like they get there and they're like, this did not match the photos at all. It looked so much more neutral. Like if we're
Right.
doing bold, funky colors, it's very well documented in photos.
Yeah, they can't claim that they're surprised.
No. Mm-mm.
That's cool. If someone wants to work with you or someone that's just bought a property that they want to turn into a short-term rental, how do they get in touch with you? What's the best way? Is it social media? Is it through your website? What's the best way to kind of start that process?
Yeah, I would say on my website, I've got a form on there that asks for some key details that are easier to get kind of all in one go. So if you go to my website, moxieco.ca, and then go to the contact us page, there is a form there. That's a great way. I'm very quick to respond. So usually I'll get back to you within the same day.
Cool. And then I always have one final question that I ask everybody coming on the podcast. And that is, and you answer it any way that you see fit. And that is, what is it that you do to stay creative?
You know what? Most recently, I am getting back into print and like physical design inspiration. So I find I get burnt out from Pinterest and Instagram, and I just find it easy to kind of go through the motion and do what everybody else is doing. But I find those times where I get offline, I get outside in nature, or I pick up an old magazine, an old like furniture catalog, doesn't have to be new, is where I find the most creative ideas. So I guess to sum it up, it's getting offline.
Well, thank you so much for giving me some of your time today. It was really interesting to kind of approach interior design and that kind of thing from this sort of perspective, from the virtual perspective. I guess I did have one more question that I would just want to ask you before you go. So You said you've never been in any of the spaces that you've designed. Is that right?
Yep, correct.
Is there any sort of desire to like go check out one of these places and be like, oh, let me actually stand in it and see what it's like?
I'm mentally booking this like US tour where I can just hit up all of them and go check them out. No, every property I wish that I could go step foot in. But not a ton of reason to go to some of these places. And I mean, it would take a year to go to all of them. So one day I'll
better
just
start making plans and booking flights.
I know. No, you know what I need to do? We need to just rent a trailer and just do this cross-country tour. We'll hit up all of them and I can finally see them all in person and really just relish in the work that I've done.
Yeah. It would. I would imagine it would be something really cool to see, to finally see all the work that you've put into all these places.
It's funny because I'll get a new inquiry from a really, really cool place. And I'm like, okay, this one, let's go family. We're going to go down to this one, but we still haven't. I think part of it is that I'm completely slammed with projects, that like, there's not a lot of gaps in my schedule that I can just take off and disappear. And when we do, it's like a family vacation. So, but who knows, maybe we'll need to take the family vacation in Scottsdale.
Scottsdale is a very beautiful place. I actually really like it there quite a bit. I almost moved there. So it's really pretty. But anyway, it's a good problem to have, that you're so busy that you can't make it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Andrea.
Well, thank you so much for having me.